Now let me turn to the question of immigration. The President has signed an executive order about immigration for a certain segment of our society. You agree or disagree with what the President
I don't agree with how he did it, that's for sure. And I want to say that I think there is a consensus, and I've talked about this with you and others, that we do want to help young people who are undocumented through no fault of their own, have graduated high school, have very good grades, have a lot contributed to the future. But we have to help them in the right way. We also have an illegal immigration problem in this country, and it's a significant one. And so the balance we're trying to strike is, how do you help these kids who need the help, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't encourage illegal immigration? That's not an easy balance, but we have to get that right, because otherwise it could have some very significant unintended consequences. Unfortunately, the way the President's done this, there is no discussion. He's basically, by fiat, shoving this down the throat of the American people. And more importantly, he's ignoring the Constitution, ignoring the congressional process. I know I get frustrated with Congress, but that doesn't mean I'm about to ignore the Republic, because I have a really good idea that I think everybody else should see it the way I do. I think that's really the problem. From a practical point of view, what the President has done is going to make it harder for us to arrive at a reasonable, bipartisan, balanced approach to these kids' situation. And I think it's going to, in the short term, I know a lot of these kids will be happy because they're desperate for a solution, but in the long term, what they really need is a long-term solution. This is going to make it harder to find one.
Is the President signing the executive order doing this, is it an unlawful exercise of power? Was it an unconstitutional move?
Well, I certainly think it ignores the Constitution.
But, if you ignore the Constitution, yeah. I mean, are you saying sort of politely that it was unconstitutional?
Well, let me say the President believed it was unconstitutional not so long ago, and something obviously changed in his mind. I think is probably the proximity of the elections, that he was willing to do something like this. You know,
but you're a lawyer. What do you think?
Well, I think that it borders on unconstitutional. I think that it certainly may even very well be. And before I'm in, the reason, it's not that I don't want to tell you that it's unconstitutional, because I probably am going to conclude that it is, but I think that's a strong statement. And before I say that, I should obviously study all the applications of the law to make sure that's exactly the case. Let me put it to you this way. I think it ignores the Constitution. I certainly don't think it's something that's constitutionally defensible, and I think he had reached that conclusion. And I believe that after I'm fully done analyzing the situation, I think all of us are going to arrive at the conclusion that this is unconstitutional.
Do you think in the next two years, regardless of who's president, that we will finally have, I mean, some definitive policy, immigration policy in this country? Because right now some people are upset that the borders aren't being secure. Other people are upset because people are getting tossed out. I mean, people are all over the board on this.
Well, I hope so, but this just made it harder, because it's just poisoned the well, and I think it's changed the dynamic of this. And what's to stop the President now? Why don't he can go on and decide not to enforce the immigration law at all? And some argue that's exactly what it's done before we got to this point. Look, this immigration issue is complicated. It's not an easy issue. On the one hand, there's a real human element to it. I mean, the vast majority of people that are here undocumented are here because they're in search of a better life for their families. On the other hand, we can't be the only country in the world that doesn't have immigration laws it enforces. And I think we also have to remind people that we are the most generous country in the world on legal immigration. 1 million people a year immigrate to the United States legally. What other country in the world even comes close? And there are millions of people waiting to enter this country legally. They've waited in line, they've paid the fees. What do we tell them? Come illegally, it's cheaper and faster? Those are valid concerns as well. Those two things have to be balanced, and I think that's a hard thing to do. It takes time to arrive at that point. But I think when he does these sorts of actions that ignore the Constitution and ignore the Congress, the President makes it harder for us to come together and work on this issue in a responsible way.
Senator, thank you, sir.
Thank you.